pair of shoes in my life, but it's really helped my knees out a lot. Okay.
Now it's on.
Okay.
Better.
I would just say.
I'd move add a little more.
Okay.
We will edit so.
Better.
I think that works good.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. Well, I let someone know that if Marty comes to let him in, but apparently we'll figure out what was the problem and maybe schedule him at one-on-one interview or however it would work to be fair. We'll figure something out. But as long as you're here and have a few minutes, we'll try to keep it somewhat short. But I was we've all met before when we had you in for the primary. I was curious since. We've talked about ferry issues a little bit in here before. Your take on the latest developments with this PVA report, and also some of the things your colleague Larry Sequist has been pushing for and recommending. Where are you at with this? What's your read on the report?
I didn't think that the report broke a whole lot of new ground. I mean, for what it's worth, the type of things that we've been focused on the ferry front over the last few years have really kind of focused in 3 or 4 areas. One, trying to get a handle on operating costs and reduce cost operation. And the report touched a little bit on that, looking at things like getting fuel costs in check and getting labor costs in check.
I'll hold you on there. Good. Thank you.
Hey, how are you, sir?
Thank you, Mark. We just turned the camera on and we said,
great.
You didn't come here, we'd figure something out. But
oh, thank you.
Glad you made it.
I got stuck in an inspection and going across town. Sorry, guys. Good
No
to see you
problem.
again.
Good seeing you.
Thank you.
Okay, now
Good.
we will restart here.
Get over.
Marty.
No, I think you're okay.
All right.
You're all right.
Maybe a few inches closer. But what we were talking about to get started was Derek had just started talking about his reaction to this most recent ferry report. We've talked ferries with you guys before, and I know it's an issue there. And so getting some response and where you're at with what this PVA group recommended, and then also kind of some of the things that Larry Sequist in your district has been pushing for, and just your opinion on those and where you stand. So I'll allow you to begin again. Sure. Sorry for the interruption.
So I was saying, part of the recommendations have been things that we've been working on in terms of getting a handle on some of the operating costs, including labor costs and fuel costs. Second, the part of the recommendation is getting the right boats built for the right price. I mean, one of the things that I focused on since I got down there was, when I got down there, I was looking at how the ferry system invested its capital dollars, and there seemed to be a focus on investing in very expensive terminals rather than actually building boats that float. And it's the equivalent of building a really nice 3-car garage when you don't have any cars that run. That is a problem. And so actually looking at how the state builds boats and which boats get built. I mean, I actually appreciated the recommendation that the focus going forward be on building larger boats that can actually be adequate backups within the system. That will serve Kitsap County better. I mean, one of the things that you will see the Kitsap County delegation speak with one voice on is trying to get 144-car vessels built rather than the 64-car vessels going forward. And then, of course, and this is something that Larry has worked on and I have worked on, is trying to lower some of the headquarter costs. And this means, as an example, trying to move design out of WSF. I mean, WSF can operate boats, but it's the equivalent of United Airlines designing airplanes. United Airlines doesn't design airplanes; it operates airplanes. And I don't see a strong rationale why WSF should be in the ferry boat design business. And
how much involvement should they have? Should there be anyone there? Should there be some review there?
I think it's legitimate to say these are the specs broadly of what we want, how we want a boat to serve the system. But to get into such nitty-gritty details, that's part of what's driving cost within the system. And if you talk to some of the shipyards, it's actually what's driving some of the cost of design and construction, because we've overspec. The WSF has overspec these things. And so that's part of it. Far and away the most controversial recommendation in the report is the discussion around out-of-state construction. And I think you'll see some dialogue about that within the legislature. There was some dialogue on it when Christine Rolfes sponsored a bill to do that. I actually would support that. I believe our shipyards can compete with anybody. And they do. I mean, if you look, they're competing in other states and building boats for other states and for private entities in other states, and I think they can compete. The downside of having kind of the more protectionist approach that we have is twofold. One, we aren't able to secure any federal dollars, you know, and there have been federal dollars that we could go after. And then secondly, you know, I believe competition actually drives down price. And you know, you only had one bidder bid, and most of the other ferry contractors in the state are serving as subcontractors to Todd. That is not a way to get an affordable boat built by the state.
You don't think it hurts the boat building industry
I think
in
they can
Washington State?
compete. I think that, you know, I actually am confident that they can compete. I've met, you know, in my day job, and there's, you know, there's a reputable shipyard in Pierce County that I've met with annually since I've worked for the Economic Development Board. I think they're fully capable of competing, particularly if we get away from over-speccing these boats, as WSF has done, setting some broad parameters and letting our shipyards compete. I think they'd succeed.
Let's let you answer the question, Mike.
Boy, I hate to agree with Derek, but some of those things where competition does breed excellence in these streamlined processes when you have competition. Oftentimes people doing the job will do the job anyway, but they have a better, more incentive to do it better or cheaper. The boat idea as well, larger boats do make sense, like a jumbo jetliner. And it just, it's common sense, which we need more of around here as far as how can we save dollars and still commute people back and forth in a more efficient way. Also on the out-of-state stuff, the privatizing some of those things as far as construction of the ferry docks themselves. I know Larry Sequest talks a lot about how they spend a lot of money in designing things that were never built. It's like, okay, that does make sense. And as Derek just said it too about the boats itself, it's like buying a car. You know, I can tell you what I want, what color I want it, but I don't need to build it and someone else to build it, so it makes more sense. So we won't agree on everything, but somewhere we will.
What about there was one other point that the study made about the Transportation Commission and taking fare setting authority from the commission, going to Washington State Ferries instead, and maybe basing it on, and maybe setting a rate of annual increases or something like that. Do you have any opinion on ferry fares? That's something that's come up.
Boy, I guess my opinion on that, more study, but we want to make something that's actually fiscally responsible, so it pays for itself. So we need to set fares that are fair, but that actually pay for it. So whatever that means in the long run. As far
What do you say pay for? What do you mean pay for?
I mean, we need to make, basically, we can't subsidize it to the nth degree where it doesn't make sense, where it ends up being a cost to our state over and over again. So we more efficient ferries, more efficient building, but when we're also operating, we need to base the cost based on what it actually costs over time.
Are you saying that fares should pay for operations?
No, but they should become close to it. They should be a larger part of it. We have, obviously as a state, we have transportation trying to get people back and forth. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I want to study more of what's come out on it. But I would see that ferries should be tied to something that has to do not just annual increases, but increases based on the economy, based on the revenues, based on things coming in that actually affect the riders. So, like I said, don't have exact answers for you, but Derek might.
Well, I think this is one where we'll disagree. You know, I haven't heard a Kitsap County legislator before suggest that fares should make up more of the pie for WSF. I mean, if you looked at the trend line over the last decade, it has fallen more and more on the shoulders of commuters here in Kitsap County. And the consequence of that is you see a lot of people who've just given up on the system. You know, my wife used to commute by ferry out of Southworth, and she just gave up, in part because you didn't have consistency of actually being able to get on the boat, and in part because fares kept going up and up and up. I actually do think there's some value in getting, rather than having an unelected transportation commission setting the fares, having WSF be able to have some control there. I do think there needs to be, it should be a comprehensive process where the public continues to have some say in the matter. And you know, and they have a better feel for, and they can be more flexible about the decisions they make. I mean, one of the things that came out in the report was the notion of, you know, if you had someone who was able to say, you know, we're not getting a lot of late evening traffic, why don't we lower the fares in late evening and try to at least improve fare box recovery for some of those late runs. That actually makes sense, and it's something that, you know, through a process that the Transportation Commission currently goes through, you just don't see those sorts of ideas. So right now you have a goal within the system having fares cover about 80% of fare box recovery. I would hate to see something that goes dramatically beyond that. And I also think, you know, part of our goal should be reducing the cost of operating the system and trying to hold fares in check, because they're the lifeblood for ferry commuters and they're the lifeblood of our ferry communities.
On that too, I don't want the riders to pay more, but I want it to be tied to something that's realistic, like budget oversight, like are we being wise with our system, you know, without tying these rates to it. That's all I'm saying. That it shouldn't be some randomly 3% a year increase on ferry fees, and we need to tie it to actual data. That's all I'm saying. So.
One thing, if memory serves, the last time you guys were in here was before the most recent budget forecast for next year had come out. I don't think we were using the number $3 billion at that time, and so I'd like to know your thoughts since that's been that's been kind of thrown out there and maybe is in the head of the people who are going to be down there next session. What are you thinking about as you start to approach that question and the problem that's probably going to be looming? Mario, will you take it first?
Okay. I think we were talking about $3 billion number before, but it's still there.
I do a lot of this.
And some are forecasting if we don't do something about it, it could be close to 8 million or 8 billion.
Still a big number.
It's still an issue of not fixing the problem. We need to actually rein in spending. We know that's an issue. We know that we need to create jobs in the private sector so we can create the revenue that we're losing. Our revenues are down, but sales taxes are down. People aren't working. You know, they're not buying stuff. So we need to fix that. And how do you fix that? You obviously get them back to work. And we both talk about jobs, but the $3 billion deficit is something definitely worried about, and people at the doors are worried about it. They're worried about the fact that if we know that debt and deficit, obviously, you know, actually kill jobs as we try to solve these things. So we need to not kill jobs and solve the problem. So, Derek.
So, to me, you know, the size of the problem gets bigger, but the tools that you use to fix it remain the same. You know, the way I approach this is really looking at three things. First, the first question you need to ask are, what are the core priorities of state government? You know, and what are some of the non-essentials that we can cut? You know, it's why I've been vocal and active as a legislator, trying to get rid of some of the things that just don't make sense. I mean, we had a budget this last year where in the initial budget there was a proposal to spend $1.5 million putting decorative lights on the narrowest bridge. You know, I removed that money from the budget, not because I didn't think they'd be pretty, but because we can't afford it. There are non-essentials that we just simply need to pull the plug on. Two, you know, one of the key questions is how do we reform state government and do things more efficiently and effectively? You know, one of the bills I sponsored set up a government efficiency hotline within the Office of the State Auditor to actually empower the public to come forward with ideas where they see what instances of waste or fraud or abuse, where we can act on those. You know, that auditor's number has gotten over 4,000 calls. You know, I mean, that is something that actually can make a real difference. You know, I chair the Higher Ed Committee, and our agenda this last session was primarily driven by looking for opportunities for efficiency, and we passed a number of bills on that front, and I'm happy to talk about those. And then finally, the most important lever to me is how do you grow jobs? How do you get this economy cooking? That's what I do for a living. I work in economic development when I'm not down in Olympia. And if you really want to solve our state's budget problems, you have got to get this economy moving. Two things happen when the economy is in the tank. One, the revenues that come in the door continue to fall. And two, there's a greater demand for state services. Not even just social services, even education services. You know, every community college in the state has record enrollment right now. You know, we're seeing kids who've been in private school or homeschooled showing up in our K-12 system because mom and dad can't afford it anymore. I mean, if you really want to solve the state budget challenges, we've got to focus on economic development and moving the state forward economically.
I was going to ask, we just had Tim Sheldon in here before you guys, and I think it's pretty well accepted that Tim Sheldon's has a real independent streak, doesn't vote with his party all the time. And so one of the things we were asking him about was how does he be a leader and stay independent when you have this Democratic majority that's been down there that's going to change some in this coming election. I think a lot of people will also agree on that point, that there's a real good chance that this is going to shift a little bit. Now we don't know how much it's going to shift. For someone who would be coming in new, how do you work with a group that, you know, this is I-960 was the result of they could not get along. We went over that here before. And for Derek, if you're back there? How do you be a leader and say, these two groups, we need to get along and settle this thing, we can't keep going to special sessions, things like that? What's your thought on that, how you move things forward and get Republicans and Democrats working a little bit closer together as the numbers probably even out a little bit this year? I will let you,
Sure.
your
Yeah.
start.
You know, I made two decisions when I got elected, and it was not my initial idea. I sat down with a guy named Tom Swayze. He used to represent our district. He and I were in Rotary together before he passed away. He used to represent this district, and he was a Republican, and he was a good friend. When I got elected, he gave me two pieces of advice. First, he said, with every bill that comes before you, vote what you think is right. You know, he said, and he was right, you know, neither party has a monopoly on good ideas. And I've discovered that's true. Frankly, there's people in both parties that have good ideas, and there's people in both parties that have nutty ideas. I think you're well served when you vote what you think is right. And second, and I've done that, you know, I buck my party particularly on fiscal issues and some of the business climate issues because I work with small businesses for a living. And, you know, I tend to be, and frankly, I'm cheap. So that's part of the approach I take. And the other piece of advice he gave me was, with every bill you sponsor, work to get bipartisan co-sponsorship and bipartisan support. And that is a lost art in Olympia, I think. If you look at the bills I've sponsored, nearly every bill that I have passed, all but one had bipartisan support over the last 4 years. All but one had bipartisan support off the Senate floor.
That's a bills passed.
Bills passed.
What about proposed?
You know, almost every bill I proposed had bipartisan co-sponsorship. I mean, that is not an easy thing to do. But if you actually demonstrate a willingness to work with people across the aisle, you can actually get a lot more done. I mean, as a consequence of working that way, and you can look at this, you know, my batting average for getting things done for our district and actually getting bills passed is substantially higher because I actually demonstrate a willingness to work across party lines.
What is your batting average?
I can look it up for you, but it's high.
Yeah, well, first of all, when you have an overwhelming majority in the governorship, the House and the Senate, there isn't a whole lot of need. By a swing and having a more equal amount of people on both sides of the House rather than the Senate will be great. We'll have discussion. We'll talk about ideas, and like Derek said, we both have good ideas and some nutty ideas. But to be able to actually talk about them, flesh them out, and find out. And sometimes a good idea isn't a great idea when you start fleshing out the details of it. Just like we've agreed on a couple of things in the past, there are things we'll agree about down there with the other people in the Senate. Being in real estate, you got to know the both sides. You got to understand that the seller and the buyer, you know, want the same thing, but the way they want to get the most, they want to get most. There's a way to negotiate, the way to have a win-win for both parties. I've got over 11 years of that experience. Obviously, knowing how to work with people is what it is. It's a relationship business. Same thing down there too, is building relationships and knowing, hey, this makes the most amount of sense for our state, most amount of sense for our community. Why don't you partner with me? And I think we'll have a great success with that, especially when we have better numbers back and forth. So.
Or you get
or
stuck. I mean, that's the other problem here,
though.
because you have to talk about
Right.
passing the budget and getting settled on some of those things.
Right.
But those aren't as easy, and that's kind
But-
of led to some of those votes.
Right. Just like competition, though, breeds excellence. When you have that friction going on, saying this is the right way, and you have enough of a discussion going on, something better comes out of it. Where you're, and that's with the one provision, that the people there have the best interest of the community in mind. And then if they don't, then you just have issues. But if everybody's on the same table and want what's best for here, it'll come out in the end good for us. So.
You know, we worked on a bill dealing with how the four-year universities deal with tuition. And I have to tell you, it was one of the coolest debates we've had since I've been in the legislature, because it passed with like 29 votes, but it didn't pass with 29 partisan votes. Half the Democrats voted for it and half the Republicans voted for it. I mean, and everyone came off the floor going, now that's the kind of debate we should be having. It wasn't around partisan lines. It was around, you know, different philosophies about how to solve problems. And I kind of like that.
Yeah.
I think we need more of that. I'd love to see a budget pass with, you know, 29 votes, but not along party lines.
Well, I guess on that topic, is there a conversation regarding taxes? You're excited to have this one about the four-year institutions. What about the conversation about taxes? What should that, if you're going to sit and talk honestly about something, what should you be talking about? Are you going to walk in and just say, nothing, we'll never talk about that? Or is there something that would be a constructive way to say, here's what we should take away, here's what we should add? Is that worth having in the legislature?
I think those discussions are great in a sense, if we're coming from polar opposite places even. You know, from typically on the Republican side, you're typically no taxes are where we're going to go. I think that's where you go wrong, is like, it's no taxes if you don't look at everything else first. You know, if we can go back to the public and say, we've cut our costs, we've reined in spending, we've balanced according to what we actually have, we've actually did audits and actually took action, and then you go back and say, and we're still short. Okay, when you mind your own house first and then come and ask, I think then your discussion's open. I think going in and saying, if we do what's best here, we're open to this. And I think if, on the other side, if that's the only option on the table like it was last time, if they were saying, let's look at things we have to do to our own thing, about reining in spending, about balancing according to things, about bringing more accountability and transparency, about cutting things that are non-essential, non-priorities. You know, that's the starting points. And then you get to the point where taxing may not be a point at all.
Do you think that took place before the candy, bottled water, soda tax went into place?
I wasn't there, but under my understanding, no.
Same question for you.
I think the biggest mistake of the session was before the session began, there was basically a announcement from the governor that, you know, the budget couldn't be balanced without new taxes. And as a consequence, I think the focus was on the wrong questions. I mean, suddenly the shift became, you know, which taxes and how much, rather than some of the questions that I laid out to your second question. You know, to me, the first questions you got to ask are, what are the priorities? How do we reform state government? How do you get this economy cooking again? I do think it's reasonable to look at, as a starting point, I would at least have, if having answered those questions, you still want to have a conversation around revenue, to me the starting point should be looking at some of the state's tax loopholes. You know, we have about a 500-page book of tax exemptions, some of which are very good. As an economic developer, I can tell you some of which I use to try to lure businesses or try to grow the businesses we have, but some of which are loopy. You know, I mean, we've got, in this state, we've got tax breaks for everything from the pro wrestling industry to betting for chicken coops. I mean, it's...
Give me a loopy one.
Betting for chicken coops.
That would be,
You know, I mean, you know, the gold bullion industry. I mean, I don't know anyone who works in the gold bullion industry, and maybe there's a rationale for having that, but I think at least there should be a cogent discussion around, you know, around some of those. And, you know, a few years back there was a proposal that said, let's at least do a performance audit of some of the tax incentives that we have on the books. And you know who the primary supporters of that was? It was the folks who work in economic development. Because we actually want to protect the ones that work. Mm-hmm. And the ones that don't work kind of give the ones that work a bad name. So I think that is a valuable conversation.
So whose job is it? Who should start this?
Oh,
are you going to start it?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. But the issue becomes this. If the starting point of the discussion is, let's go find some revenue, you've already given up the ghost in terms of making thoughtful reforms and trying to actually cut out some of the non-essentials of state government. That would be a mistake. All right, the conversation can happen simultaneously or a little, you know, but to me the starting point needs to be on those three core questions.
Talking about non-essentials, the initiative, there's two of these initiatives for the liquor privatization. I was just curious your opinions on both of them, actually, if you favor one over the other, and or if you oppose them. Where do you stand on that issue? How are you voting if you feel that way?
I've always thought it was strange that the state was in the liquor business. I've asked for a copy of two things. One, I want to actually read the reports from the Office of Financial Management and see what assumptions went into it, because they came to a very different conclusion than the Office of the State Auditor. The Office of the State Auditor suggested that this could be money-making for the state to get out of the liquor business. The fiscal notes from the Office of Financial Management suggest that the state's going to take a real bath on these initiatives. And I kind of want to, I'm a data guy, I want to get my head around that before I cast my vote.
Yeah, that's what we've been asking everyone, what their understanding is about that.
So,
obviously more data is better. On the surface and what I've read so far, I like the Costco version, Initiative 1100, which based on what I've read, it should be a revenue generating one. From just a simple common sense standpoint, if we're paying people to inefficiently run a service, the government run, and we're selling product, and we also provide health care, we provide benefit packages for them, and you remove that, privatize it, move them over to that segment where you actually have more of a gain from sales and from the business itself, you would think it would be a positive generator. It may not be, and that's something I would like to know as well. But on the surface, I prefer that one over the other one, whereas the other one's the more distributor one, and too many hidden things there. So.
Okay. One other thing I was curious, since I mean, you guys have had time to go knock on doors and talk to people in your district. I'm sure you've done a lot of that in the last couple of weeks. Give me what you think the issues specific to the 26th district that you need to handle, that you would take on yourself, either it's legislation or getting a group together, whatever. Not something broad, just like jobs, but what's needed in your district right now that you're hearing people tell you? What Marty said.
Boy, I'm sure Derek's hearing the same thing at the doors. People are afraid. Just yesterday I was at a door and the lady says, I'm thankful I have a job, but I can't hold them in my house. You know, in real estate, we're seeing about 25 to 30% of the market now is short sale or foreclosure because people can't.
Is that the same in 26th
Yeah,
district?
that's 26.
Yeah.
I'm doing this local, this we sell locally. So obviously jobs are huge. They have jobs, but they're worried about the economy and what they don't want to expect in the future. You said something small and specific. I'm coming to them as a small business guy saying, I'm right there with you. I have kids in this community. I have kids in grade school that go here. You know, I'm struggling financially with everything else we're all going through. I'm right there with you, so I understand. And we have some very real solutions on the ballot. There's privatizing workers' comp that I get behind. There's ways that when the voters approve an initiative like 960, how about passing a reform where it says that us, as legislators in the Senate, have to have 2/3 majority to actually overturn one of those things versus a simple majority. Some of those things after 2 years. It's very real things. And people, small businesses, and Derek knows this as well, about all they really want is they want to know what to expect 3, 5, 10 years from now as far as regulation goes, so they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And they want to be able to have a fair tax rate. And I've talked a lot about the B&O tax reform. I know that's a larger thing, but it's something that's been on the table for a while. And Washington Policy Center talks about a one flat rate B&O tax rate based on net proceeds. It's time to look at that. It's time to work on getting that, because instead of having multiple rates where people don't know what they're paying and the time and effort of finding out who they're paying and how much and rates on, we should look at that as far as, and what, according to them too, according to Washington Policy Center, said is it would be revenue neutral, so it wouldn't cost the state or lose money. So on those notes, those are things we can work on.
Yeah, you know, the main thing that comes up on people's doors is their concern about jobs. You know, folks want to get this economy cooking again, and that's what got me into this. I mean, I have a day job. I was working in economic development and I got grumpy. You know, I think our state needs to do a better job of this, and that's, you know, really how I got into this. So I'd say that is far and away the biggest issue, and it's the one that I spend most of my time on in Olympia. The other issue that comes up a lot at the door is transportation issues, particularly in the Pierce County side of the district. Folks are concerned about Narrows Bridge tolls. That's something that I've worked very hard on to try to keep toll increases in check. Was able to pass a law this last year that prevented a toll increase from going forward. I mean, in January, the Transportation Commission announced their intent to raise the toll, and it actually took some hard work in Olympia to keep that from happening. And you know, we're going to have to keep at that to you know, continue to whack away, particularly at the operating expenses of DOT. I mean, when that bridge opened, they had a proposal to have 22 DOT employees to administer that bridge. You know, I asked them, I said, show me what all these people are doing. And they couldn't justify it, so I cut it from 22 down to 7. You know, those are the types of things we're going to keep having to do to keep those in check.
Is DOT too big of an organization?
You know,
Or an agency?
as an agency, you know, there's a lot that DOT deals with. They deal with ferries. You know, State Patrol sits under the transportation budget. It is a big organization. I think it is incumbent on us to make sure that the dollars that go through DOT, I mean, most of the work that happens on a transportation standpoint are done by contractors. I mean, we contract out the majority of the work. As a state, and that's smart. I mean, that's a smart way to do it. The key to me is, and where I get concerned, I mean, for example, when there was the issue with the Nowe Valley, and they had those issues of waste, that didn't just upset me as a legislator, that upset me as a taxpayer. I mean, it upset me when DOT comes in to the legislative session during the session and gives an update on that project, and somehow it slips their mind that they've made this tremendous mistake. The other thing that upset me is when we had them before the Joint Transportation Committee, and I raised this issue in a public hearing, was they said, well, there was money built into the budget for these types of overruns. You know, excuse me? That is, you know, I don't want to presume that we're going to have these enormous mistakes. And you know, the types of things that I think we need to look at is, I think we should look at the contingency funds on some of these projects. You know, the issue may not be simply DOT as an agency, but also how much is being invested in some of these projects, and are we giving them too much wiggle room to come in, you know, to give them the latitude to come in under budget even though they're still spending too much. That's what gives me concern.
Where would you like to put the kind of the lever to make some of this happen? Should you beef up the state auditor's office so they're looking closely at that thing? Is that where the legislature gets into the weeds of some of these budgets to make sure there isn't this money set aside because you're assuming an overrun?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, the state auditor's office has done a good job of actually auditing the performance of DOT, and actually we are working to act on a lot of those recommendations because they're thoughtful. You know, and there is a requirement of legislative oversight that I think is very, very important. I mean, it's why when the DOT comes in with the Narrows Bridge budget, you know, my approach was not just to rubber stamp it. It was to basically do a zero-based budget of the Narrows Bridge budget and say, let's see what we can afford and what we can't afford. I mean, that's how you keep some of these things in check.
This is another one, and you both, if you'd like to comment on that, I should give you the opportunity.
I'm good.
It's a little, I mean, it was a little,
it was geared
someone
towards
who's
that.
been there, who's been in that seat. But, so if, I will assume this is going to happen. Let's say either one of you is in office and this kind of scrutiny improves. How is that shared with your constituents? How are people going to know this? How are you going to make sure people know, hey, we're fixing some of the problems, or people can see we're still making the same mistakes? What are you going to do? Because you're knocking on people's door and they're saying, here's what I'm frustrated about, here's what I'm angry about. What are you telling them, and what are you going to do to make sure people feel more engaged, people trust their government a little bit more? How are you going to solve that problem? We'll let Marty say.
Accountability and transparency is huge for everybody. They want to know what's going on. They want to make sure they can trust the people that represent them. This is what it's supposed to be about. Someone like them going to serve them. I've been telling people about Facebook. All this technology we have now, Facebook and Twitter and that kind of stuff, are great ways. I'm sure Derek's already doing that. But it's a way of letting people know. Email lists, talking about Marty's team of business leaders that want to have updates on a quarterly basis where we get together and have breakfast and talk about what's going on in the government. Also, good and bad. This is what we're working on. I need your support to make phone calls. This is what's not going on because it's getting stonewalled. Talking about beating the drum. It's like when don't have any people pulling your strings, you know, you can beat the drum and say, okay, look, this makes sense. I've talked to so-and-so. These are all what the numbers say, but yeah, we're not getting anywhere. We need to, you know, beat the drum, get on your Facebook, get on and tag everybody and make sure everybody knows about it. I think that's the way we get community involvement, get people back re-engaged from there.
Yeah, it's actually one of the most important questions, I think, because one of the things that you hear when you're out knocking on doors is people are worried, but people also feel like it's broken. And I get that. You know, it's part of the reason I take the approach to the job that I take. There's a few things you can do. I mean, part of it is keeping people informed, you know, and that's why you do, I mean, I do a weekly email newsletter during the session, and then it's every few weeks outside of the legislative session. We're prohibited from doing it during campaign season. So that's a bummer because I'd actually like to keep people up to date. You know, I do a ton of town hall meetings, and I've spoken to probably about 40 to 50 groups every year since I've been in office. Every Rotary Club, Kiwanis Club, Lions Club, Chamber of Commerce, VFW, you know, I go and talk with them and listen to them. And I think that's part of it. And the other thing for me is, even in years when I'm not on the ballot, I go out and knock on doors. You know, in my time, since I got into this, I've knocked on over 42,000 doors. And it, to me, is one of the coolest things about democracy, because I work for you. I mean, that's how this works. And so part of it is actually not just letting you know what I'm up to, but listening to your ideas. About half the bills I've sponsored have come from standing on people's porches, you know, and having them say, I got this problem, and I'm hoping you can help me fix it. Or even if it's something that I was already working on, you know, to be able to have a human face to the problem. I mean, 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, when there was a challenge, I was out on the Key Peninsula and I talked to a woman who said, boy, we need a hospital in Gig Harbor. And I said, I agree with you. And she said, you don't understand, my husband had a heart attack during commute time. And this was before the new bridge opened. And she said, you know, you don't know what it's like to sit there worrying about whether your husband's going to make it because he's stuck in traffic. And so when I worked on that bill to help us get the new hospital built in Gig Harbor, you know, I was able to actually talk about that and present a human face to it. So it's not just about, you know, the kind of broad theme of healthcare services, or, you know, this is an important project that brings 450 new jobs. It's about that woman and her husband.
How did the bill help the hospital?
There's, when the Franciscans announced that they wanted to build a new hospital, the initial reaction from the community was terrific. And then unfortunately the reaction from the city of Gig Harbor was, I'm sorry, you can't, because our roads are at capacity. Under the Growth Management Act, you're required to have concurrency, and we don't have the capacity. And so I worked with the city of Gig Harbor and with Franciscan Health System, and sponsored a bill that was called Hospital Benefit Zone Financing, and it was a way to basically fund the improvements to the roads at Gig Harbor North. When that bill passed, the city of Gig Harbor moved the project from a red light to a green light. And as a consequence, you now have a hospital there that provides critical health services and provides 450 new jobs. And that's important. I mean, and you know, I brought with me an editorial from the News Tribune that mentioned it wouldn't have happened but for this bill passing.
Have any other communities used that? Do you know?
Well, no, because it's a very uncommon thing for a new hospital to get built in this state. There's, you know, literally been, you know, you can count on one hand in the last several decades how many hospitals have been built in this state.
But it was written broadly enough so someone else, if I lived in Stanton, I could...
It could. It could. And it's a way to do it, to have growth pay for growth without new taxes too. And it is a tool that in economic development nearly every other state uses. And it's time for our state to kind of step into the 21st century with regard to some of the economic development tools that we have.
All right, I saw you nodding on that.
Well, yeah, it's time for us to actually follow some of the things that work in other states, like workers' comp reform, like West Virginia's doing, like B&O tax reform, like Texas is doing, that have shown a positive and more revenues in the coffers. The hospital, too, I was doing some study on that, and there were over 700 letters from citizens. I mean, there was some huge community involvement in that. And then the hospital talks about how they lobbied as well, lobby legislator for time and time, trying to get, you know, movement on this. So I'm glad it's there. It's really good, but it's funny that it took 700 letters. It should be one of those things that, once again, common sense from a legislative standpoint from a state. This makes sense for a community. You know, we need to make it a little bit easier for those things to happen in the future.
There's two different things here, though, and in fairness, I know you didn't live in the district at the time that this was happening, but you know, the 700 letters were to get a certificate of need from the state. The way the state deals with hospitals is you actually have to get a certificate of need to give the green light for a new hospital to get built. The issue around infrastructure was an entirely different issue. I mean, there wasn't a need to convince legislators, certainly not the local legislators, about the need to fix this road problem so that the hospital can move forward.
Did you need that many people to get the certificate of need? Or
what's
the mechanism for that?
It's a process through the Department of Health, and one of the things that's contemplated is how underserved the community is. And one of the ways the Franciscans very wisely chose to demonstrate inadequate service was they got a whole bunch of people to write letters and say, here's my personal story of being underserved. That was smart.
Yeah. Either of you have a question?
No, I think
Open it up.
Just enjoying.
And I apologize for our small group today. We had
You're fine.
two folks on vacation, two taking children back to college, one on vacation.
Well,
and
congratulations, that's good.
One,
Yeah.
Charles is entertaining a corporate guest right now, so apologize for but we're about where we said we'd finish. I have some things to do, but I'd like to conclude kind of how we did the last time. And give you guys both a chance to just anything that I haven't touched on that you think is important, or any last things. Actually, we'll go Derek and then.
Okay. Sure.
Well, you know, I have stood on 42,000 porches, and it's a daily reminder of why this matters. You know, I have, one of the most common questions I get is, why on earth would you want to do this when things are so challenging? And the answer is because things are really challenging. And we have got to do business differently. And that's why I am doing this. You know, let me talk about what that means for me. It means rather than simply talking about jobs, I'm actually trying to do something about jobs. I do this for a living. You know, I work in economic development for a living. And I'm proud of the fact that groups like Enterprise Washington have named me their legislative business star. And, you know, I was named the Leader of the Year from the Washington Economic Development Association 3 times, because this is what I work on down in Olympia. I mean, we've got to get this economy moving. It's why I worked on issues like the hospital and why I've passed laws to streamline permitting and provide some relief from the paperwork hassle for our small businesses and some tax relief for our small businesses. It's why I worked with the city of Bremerton on the bill that is actually going to enable some private sector development here in downtown Bremerton. I mean, you guys have covered the fact that they've landed a new movie theater here in downtown Bremerton. That's the result of of a bill that I worked with the city on. Doing things differently also means, rather than just voting a party line, voting people's bottom lines. I mean, I have been stubbornly independent in this job, you know, and when I've differed with my party on issues, including this last year on the budget and on the tax package, I vote against it. It's why I was the lead in the state Senate on trying to reinstate the property tax protections under Initiative 747, because I've talked to too many people who've worked hard all their life and were on the verge of getting taxed out of their homes, and I thought that was wrong. Doing things different to me means challenging the bureaucracy. It's part of the reason I've been such a pit bull on Narrows Bridge tolls. You know, I cross that bridge every day and I'm cheap. And, you know, I have been whacking away at those costs because I know times are tight and people can't afford to see more and more of their dollars go out the window. And also, doing things different means actually doing the job differently. I mean, if you look at the record, you know, I am, over the last 4 years, the only member of the state Senate who hasn't missed a vote on a single bill. The only one. Because part of the job actually means showing up and participating. It means when the legislature went into special session, I didn't take per diem payment, because I don't think legislators should get paid more when they don't get their job done. It means nearly every bill that I have passed has gotten bipartisan support, because I'm trying to do this job differently to give people faith again that the process can actually work for them. You know, these are very serious times, and they call for serious-minded people and people who can be independent-minded. You know, so far I'm very grateful to have received the sole endorsement of the News Tribune and the Peninsula Gateway and the Kitsap Business Journal and the Seattle Times. You know, when the Seattle Times endorsed me, they wrote, it was their first endorsement of the season, and they wrote, "The Times' first endorsement supports the need for change." I appreciate that, because I appreciate the fact that they understand even an incumbent can be fighting to change the way this state does business. And that's my intent going forward, and I ask you for your endorsement as well.
Once again, I'm not the politician. I'm the small business guy that thinks we can do things better. I'm the guy that's sitting back and watched how things have gotten worse over the last 4 years, the last 6 years, how the growth of government has gotten out of control, how a 33% increase in spending during a recession just doesn't make sense to me. How we had these behind closed door deals, where all this stuff where people are like, this doesn't make sense. Why are we not trying to deal with the problems in a real way? I'm the guy that says, okay, there's got to be a simpler way of getting together with people and dealing with the issues. We've gotten some Band-Aid fixes, we've gotten some good slogans, and we've gotten some things that sound good on paper, but we haven't done anything. You know, that's why the initiative comes forward with the third pay workers' comp reform. I mean, our state's 26 months on average. It's like 3 times or double the average of the national average for workers' comp. We got problems, and we need to have people that will actually attack those problems. I'm one of those guys I'm a doer. I'm a worker, I'm a work ethic. You know, I've had failures, I've had successes. And I've had kids in the school districts, so I'm going to fight for the school districts and for education. I live and work in the area, so it hits home. My surroundings, my customers and people I work with are small business owners. I've been a small business owner in the past. I own my own small business in real estate, and I manage an office. So I'm multiple tasking all the time. So this is what we need in our state government, someone who's actually going to fight and knows where everybody's at in the tough times. Knows that, hey, I know what it feels like. It hurts right now to not know if you can, you know, pay for this or keep someone employed or whatever. On top of that, we need, unfortunately too, on this train, there is going to be a change in the legislature. And what happens though is you can't send Derek back at this point in time, because what that does, it sends a resounding voice to the people in charge that it's okay and we're going to keep on doing what we're doing again. The problem with Derek is the very first bill he takes every time is for the leadership in the Democrat Party. And this is the same party right now that has caused this damage we're in, the overspending, the budget shortfalls, where we're at. And so we can't, well-intentioned or not, and good things or not. The fact is you got to send the right message to our capital right now that we won't stand towards anymore. We need more accountability. We need to be wiser with our money, and we need to fix the problems. That's who I am. I'm willing to do the job and serve for my community in that way. Thank you. And I ask for your endorsement as well. And I think we got co-endorsed for the News Tribune early on, but for the primary. Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate having you in, and
Thank you.
that
We're good?
And
Thanks, guys.
6. Yeah, perfect.
All right.
yeah,
Good to see you.
like you're going up the street now.
Yeah, can I stay parked in your parking lot?
Yes.
Sure. Is
Yeah,
that
you
all
should-
right?
You
You
should be
bet.
okay.
Thank you.
Are you?
Thanks.
I'm right here.
Also-
I'm right here.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will maybe write down what the 2 cars are. You should be fine.
Okay. Thanks, I'll leave you on.